Tim, welcome to the wild that is Onnit.
Thank you, Aubrey. Good to be here.
Good to have you, my man. Good to
Yeah.
have you. So,
Yeah.
I always mention that, nature is one of the most important medicines that we can all tap into. And it's available for most of us.
Mhm.
It's all around it. Even if you're in New York City, like a good trip to Central Park,
Sure.
can provide you a little dose. This is like a small hit of that nature. I mean, it's not the Yosemite hit. It's not that
Right.
full on,
Right.
big trip
Yeah.
where like I was in Patagonia. But there's something really powerful about just tapping back into the wild.
Yeah. 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 The wild, I mean, this is our birthright, right? This is where we come from. We've evolved from the natural world. And in our modern experience, we've become so disconnected from it. And so the medicine that it has for us, the goodness for our bodies, our hearts, our minds, our spirits is really unlimited.
It's almost like it's our instruments can get kind of out of tune and playing like some staccato rhythms and just caught up in the frantic nature of check my phone, talk to this, answer this message. Oh, I got to talk to my girl. I got the work thing. I got all the emails and I got and we're back and forth. Okay, now watch TV to take my mind off it and detach myself completely from my body. And then I'll go back into it's this pattern that we get in that if it was music, it would sound like chaos.
Exactly.
Like it's not,
Yeah, exactly.
And then you get back to nature and you hear it's like just a different rhythm. And that rhythm will start to retune your body and like be the conductor of your own internal orchestra and start to shift shit.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I see it as a couple of different ways, right? On the one hand, nature is really healing for us. And on the other hand, nature is really holing, right? This idea that as human beings, we have certain needs, right? And there's some that are really widely recognized. We've got shelter, water, fire, and food. But our connection to nature is inherent to who we are, right? I think of attachment theory. You're probably familiar with that, right? This idea that, hey, we all need a healthy relationship with our mothers and fathers from a very young age, from the very beginning. And if we don't have that, there's going to be issues. We're gonna pay a price later on in life. And that's been well researched, right? Especially the last 50 years. But what has been less well researched and really needs to be is the importance of having a healthy attachment to nature, right? That this is where we come from. And as a wilderness guide and a nature-based mentor since 99, so about 20 years now, I've seen this over and over and over. And when people come back to the natural world, they come back to themselves, right? The stress and all the outer stuff, the monkey mind and all that madness quiets down, but something deeper happens as well, right? They start to tap in to who they are as a person, to their place in the world, to their soul, right? Their calling. And that's my deepest joy, is guiding people on that journey.
What is it then? What is it about? I mean, is it this theory? Is my musical nature having a different rhythm? It's reorienting our own rhythm. Is that really what you think is happening? Or do you think it's something else or something deeper? Like, what is the process by which people can tap into their higher potentials when they are exposed to nature?
Yeah, totally. Well, I look at cultivating a relationship with nature as a developmental need that's been largely missing, right, in our world, especially the last, 100 years. But this is something that we've all had in our evolution as we've grown as human beings here on the planet. So when this comes back on board, the impacts are holistic, right? So body, heart, mind, spirit. And it's interesting, right? Because so I'm the founder of Twin Eagles Wilderness School up in Idaho. And I've done that work, like I said, for 20 years. And over the last 2-3 years, my work has shifted. And I've been working as a nature-based purpose guide. And so, what happens is that what I found is that in the early years, people would come to me and they'd say, hey, I want to develop a deeper relationship to nature. I'm feeling the call, right? I don't know why always, but I know that I want to connect deeply with nature. And so they would, right? And I teach old school skills, so wilderness survival, making shelters and rubbing sticks together to make fire and edible medicinal plants, all this kind of thing, wildlife tracking. And but beyond the connection to nature, and all that de-stressing and everything else, people would come into this deeper connection with their purpose, with their spiritual sense of calling in life. And at first, because I always felt that myself, and at first I didn't quite understand it, but as it continued and the pattern continued to play out, and I tracked that, I realized that, this is something really essential to who we are as human beings. And so I think a big part of how that works, when I think of purpose, I think of connecting with soul, right? And
how do you define soul?
Sure, soul. Well, at the most basic level, it's our deepest essence as a human being, right? It's our soul is our place in the natural world, our place in the world.
Yeah, our piece of the all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't look at it though as spiritual, right? Because a lot of people do. Are you familiar with the three worlds model?
No.
Yeah. So you can imagine three circles, right, stacked vertically. The center being the middle world, the top being the upper world, and the bottom being the lower world. Middle world is the realm of ego, and by ego I simply mean who I'm referring to when I say the word I. Upper world is the realm of spirit, right? And the lower world is the realm of soul. So average everyday waking consciousness, that's the realm of the middle world that we're all living in day to day, right? Through experiences like meditation and psychedelics and nature, we can experience our connection to the upper world, right? That might be classical enlightenment, that moment when we realize everything is one and one is all. But what's a lot less common these days is the connection to soul. And by soul, what we're talking about is our place in the world, our purpose, our calling, right? Like, what's my gift? What's authentically mine to give to the world? And, it's dangerous, right? Because in our world today, there's such a draw to the spiritual, which is beautiful and important. But if we don't recognize what we're here for, right? Our place, our gift to give to the world, then where does it leave our world?
Yeah, it's an interesting model, and I haven't really thought about it that way or heard it described that way personally.
Yeah.
But it makes sense in putting that definition on soul. I'm glad I asked you what your definition was, because it definitely makes sense what you're talking about. And I think, it seems as though nature is the way to recognize a few guiding principles of the all. Like it's inherently balanced, unless we've tampered with it, right? Like it finds homeostasis naturally, like all the organisms and plants, and it's in flux and it's in change, and
absolutely
it's still subject to climate and natural disaster and things like that. So it's not like impervious to things, but there's a sense of balance in there, and there's a sense of competitive cooperation. You know what I mean? That everything is, even if two things are competitive, they're competitive for their own species benefit. You know what I mean? And it's just, it's part of the process, part of the iron that sharpens the iron. It's part of the way that it all works, and it gives a model for how, if we insert ourselves into that global picture, how we can function as well. But we end up not doing that because the middle world is so dominant. We're so mind and ego dominant. My. This is my country, my border, my religion, my things, my money. Fuck you.
Totally.
That's what the middle world says repeatedly, and that's not what nature says. And it's so it just kind of recalibrates the way we think about things. Yeah.
So I love looking at soul as an ecological element to life and to consciousness, right? It's about our place in the world and our niche, right? If we think about that, like just from an ecological perspective, if you take, say, a squirrel, right? A squirrel's got its niche in the natural world. Now, it's got its habitat as well. So let me make that distinction. Its habitat might be, say, where I'm from in Idaho. Its habitat is the evergreen forest, right? That's where it lives. Its niche is its role in the forest. So what does it do? What are its inputs and outputs? Well, squirrels need to live, so they need to have a home, and they make nests, right?
They need nuts.
They need nuts. They need to eat. Exactly. So what do? Right? They eat the seeds and the nuts from the pine trees and the evergreens, and they shred up the bark to make their nests. They might even tap a tree like a birch tree and lap up some of the sap.
How do they do that? With their teeth?
With their teeth, yeah.
Yeah.
So now that's all input, right? But what's happening is they're having an impact on the environment, right? So they'll gather up those acorns or those pine cones and they'll bury some, they'll stash them away, cache them away, and some will be forgotten. What happens? The trees grow, right? As a result, they're planting the seeds.
Squirrels need alpha brain.
Hey.
That's right. That's a plug, Ryan. That's a plug.
There's a
Forgetting
plug
where
for
their
you.
nuts are. Yeah, they need that.
Although we've got to recognize that even that forgetfulness is a gift, right? Because what is it? It's a gift for the trees.
Except if you want to make one really dope squirrel that just remembers where all their nuts are and is wealthy, the squirrel king,
Right.
and just has mad squirrel bitches everywhere
Right.
because he's got all the nuts hoarded away because he's never forgot one of them.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's probably not good for nature if we start doing that.
Yeah.
No alpha brain for squirrels, Ryan. Retract that statement.
So they're having an impact on the environment and they're serving the environment, right? The trees get to grow with the bark that they're shredding. Birds are going to use that for their nests, right? With the sap that they're tapping out of those trees, insects are going to be drawn to that and lap that up. So just by being their most natural selves, right? Just by surrendering to who they are, right? They're in service. They're sharing their gift with the world. And for us as humans, it works the same way, right? It's what is my deepest gladness, right? Theodore Buchner, I think, was a theologist who shared this quote: "Our calling, our purpose, is where our deepest gladness meets the world's hunger." Right, and so this is a very natural thing that we're really here to surrender to. Right? Yeah. It's less about what am I going to do with my life, more about what is life going to do with me. Yeah.
Our deepest gladness meets the world's hunger. World's hunger. That's a really great way to put it, because I think the one thing that I've started to recognize is there's an ascension for me in how I can take any situation and bring it to the most conscious levels. And the most conscious, the way that I can do this is in any situation, I can ask, what is my opportunity to learn from this? Because there's always an opportunity to learn, no matter what the fuck is happening. What is my opportunity to learn from this? Yeah. Question number one. And that already starts to reframe things, because then instead of just throwing a pity party where it's like, you're like, okay, what is my opportunity to learn from this? Puts you in the positive framework right away. So that first question out of the gate.
Huge.
Okay. So, and just doing that is enough. But then there's the next escalation is, what is my opportunity to love this? You know, and that, and for me, it's this kind of capital L love. It's not like love you like you love your new girlfriend or something like that. You know, it's like, what is my opportunity to love this? To understand that it has its place, and I have appreciation for it and love for what it will bring and what I'm learning. And so it's kind of predicated a little bit on that first one, because the fact that you're learning helps you to love it, helps you to love and be grateful for this, whatever thing it is that you're going through. Right. And then the third question, which is the ascension, is what is my opportunity to enjoy this? Which is like, it seems like, well, enjoy is easier than love. Actually, not necessarily. It's sometimes easier to love just to have gratitude for something, but still not enjoy it. And I think there is that opportunity that we have to enjoy things that we don't even think we can enjoy. Right. And I think that's so that's what you're saying, like the world's hunger being met by someone's deepest gladness, you know, is I think being in service in that way and filling the bellies. Like if you cook a meal and you give it to people who are hungry, like your belly is full, like you're in gladness, you know, like when you hunt something and bring it home, if you do like all of these times that we're of service to others, it's probably some of our happiest times in our life. So it's a really good way to think about the act of service, that thing that you can be in enjoyment that also fulfills somebody else's needs, hungers, desires.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, the two phrases I think of on that point, Aubrey, are one, what is the gift in this moment, right? Anytime I come up against a challenging moment in life, which is regularly, right? Because we're all human beings. That's the question for me that offers the reframe, right? So it takes me out of victim mode, takes me out of blaming, puts me into ownership, puts me back into my power, recognizing, oh, okay, even though this moment's uncomfortable, right? I'm facing something difficult. There's something in this for me. And another way to look at that is everything is perfect, right? Yeah. In my work with Rites of Passage, I'm always telling that to the initiates. Everything is perfect. Everything is perfect, and it drives people nuts because when you're not there, right? It's hard. It doesn't feel perfect. It's uncomfortable. It sucks, and yet that's the shift that needs to be made.
Yeah, people have a real hard time with that because we're always judging one thing as better than another thing and having, but this deep attachment to preference is why the Buddhists say that life is suffering, right? Because we're always comparing this situation to another situation rather than recognizing that, that gift of the day is the day itself, is the present moment that you're in. And it cannot be any other than what it is, except for what you can bring forward positively into your mind. So it's really interesting to recognize and be in that place that where you are and what you're going through is perfect, because perhaps this is what you've needed to grow. Perhaps this is an experience that you craved to have, even if it was good or bad. Or, there's a quote that I'd love from Hafez, the Sufi poet. And he says, wherever you are right now, God circled that place for you on a map, and God being, your soul, the universe, whatever. That's a challenging word for a lot of people, and I understand that. But just basically saying wherever you are right now, that's exactly where you're supposed to be, and it's a hard thing for people to accept, but when you do, it's a really actually kind of empowering feeling. And it allows you to forgive the past so that you can actually move forward with courage and freedom and liberation.
Yeah. And that's huge, man. I mean, I watched your video on the car accident a few months ago, right? And I was really impressed, man, with your vulnerability and your willingness to take that perspective, because that was a tough hand to be dealt by life, right? Dude, I mean, that must have been difficult. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
And yet, you were able to hold on to the perspective that, oh, there's a gift in here for me, and there's something for me to learn. I'm not going to be victimized by this, right? And I think that's a big part of the key to discovering our purpose, our stepping into our potential, and really what nature is offering us. Because even when we look at the natural world, sure, there's death and destruction and chaos, but life is always regenerating itself, right? So the death of one thing leads to the life of something else, and the whole system is always growing.
Yeah.
So when we take that, how do we take that into ourselves, right? And that's where the vulnerable journey comes in. Right, like for me, as a boy, I had a tough time in childhood. I suffered some trauma. I experienced a lot of bullying. My folks got divorced when I was a teenager, and it was a tough run. Right, it was there was a lot of blows to my self-esteem in there, and for a long time, up through my early 20s, I really had a pretty negative self-image based on a lot of those experiences. And a lot of that stuff was just like the deep, dark secrets I just wanted to avoid and keep hidden away. And in the journey of connecting with nature, I always say the journey of connecting with nature is the healing journey, right? Because through that, I've found that self-love, right? Through the journey of connecting with nature, because nature as a kid, it was always the place I would go to for solace and for peace, right? And so as I followed that forward in life, that led to some amazing things, connecting with indigenous wisdom, Native American elders, different wilderness school teachers, et cetera, et cetera. But through it all, Aubrey, what I found was that as difficult as some of those early experiences were, they were actually gifts for me. You know, I'll never forget. A couple of years ago, I was leading a Rite of Passage, and one of the things I work with is the Sweat Lodge, right? Which is, of course, is the old indigenous technology that is really common to people all the way around the world. And I was working with a young man, and he was. It was clear that he had some trauma in his own life that had been unprocessed, and it was just ready to burst. Right, it needed a little coaxing, needed a little guidance there,
a little heat,
exactly, and physical as well as from the heart. And so I provided both. And he popped, right? He opened up and he cried, man. He cried cathartically for like 45 minutes. It was a huge healing moment. And it was so big. It was one of the, I don't know if you've experienced anything like this, but it was so big that it kind of had a domino effect on the others there.
Sure.
And it opens up, others start opening up. And my staff was on their edge, to be sure. And I was just in this incredible flow state, right? I was having this moment of just like, oh my God, what a miracle this is that he's just releasing this. Because what's the work in that moment, right? It's to hold space for another human being. It's okay, you can let this go. 45 minutes, right, of just bawling and letting this out until, this deep peace came. And during that time, right, in the peak of the tears and the releasing the trauma, I had this moment where I was sent back to my own trauma as a boy, and I was just like, my God, I am so thankful I experienced that back then so I could help this young man right here, right now. And that was a big reframe, man. I'll tell you what, like, because for years, for decades, that shit was my big black secret. Are you kidding me? Like, no way. And so to not only like be at peace with it, but to be thankful for it,
be grateful
to be grateful for it, to love it, to enjoy it. Right? Like, holy crap, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And so that's what I mean about like, wow, like, what is this? What's the gift in this? What does this have to teach me? How do I just need to be myself, to serve others? That was one of my favorite moments on my own journey. Yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think for me, you mentioned the accident, and I think I've had enough practice and training, and I've put myself in difficult situations enough that the big stuff, it's easier for me to make the leap to gratitude, actually. So like the car accident, I kind of came out of that like, well, I know there's a big gift here, and I know there's something I'm going to be grateful for here. I just don't know what it is yet. But I knew it was big enough that was the only way I could adopt. That was the only mindset I could, take on, because anything else would have been really hellish, right? Like
Totally.
If I would have been in the victim mode and done the other way with that and self-pity and all of this crap, like it was such a significant event, it would have buried me.
Right.
So it kind of forced me to take the higher perspective. And the harder things, traumas from the past, traumas in the present, the harder things, it's kind of like, okay, I know what I have to do here. I don't have any leeway. But it's the little trivial stuff. Right. It's the little nagging trivial stuff.
Yeah.
Like, my knee kind of hurts today. Oh, I'm tired today. Like that's the shit that just over time just is kind of really illuminates how much more work I have to do, even on the little stuff, because I can have an accumulation of all these little things that can make my day not vibrant and not joyful. But nothing's been challenging enough for me to actually apply the lessons and the knowledge that I have. Right. So I'll just kind of patch it up and go through the day. It'll be like, if I have a wound, I'll know to care for that wound and heal it. But if I get 1,000 paper cuts, I'll just kind of ignore it. Like, paper cut again, paper cut, And so I think that's the practice, is to just get in that mind state where even for the little stuff, you just remember like, okay, this little fatigue is teaching me something. There's a little thing there, and I can actually enjoy the remedy of that and love the remedy, love the remedy of that, which may be rest and maybe like taking some time off, or maybe going and meditating, or a binaural nap, or whatever the hell you're going to do. Right. Like you can really enjoy the whole process. And I think when I look forward to the next part of my life, it's not that it's not so much about the big things for me now. And sure, there may be more big things coming up. Like you could turn around the corner and you're like, I conquered all the beasts. And then you like meet a rhinoceros and you're like, fuck.
Right.
So
never know.
But really, I think for me, it's about handling all of the little things so that I can really, you know, I want to be known as the one who enjoyed the second half of his life the most he could. You know, like that's if people talking about, oh, what's your legacy, whatever, I don't know. That's it for me. Like I want to be Aubrey. He enjoyed the second half of his life the most he could. You know, like fuck yeah, all right,
hell yeah.
And then the enjoyment again, like you said from that quote, you know, the gladness in filling others' bellies, you know, is part of my enjoyment. It's an inexorable part. So people think, oh, enjoyment, I'm going to be on a fucking yacht somewhere, like pouring champagne off my eyeballs. Like, no, you know, like every once in a while, maybe I will. I'll go Rob Gronkowski on a giant yacht and get wild. Like, of course, every once in a while, but that's not what really feeds me. You know, like I can do that once every 6 months or a year or something on and that'll be totally plenty. And then the rest really I enjoy the most is doing stuff like this, podcasts and speaking to people and working with people and putting my message out. And even those long days where I'm writing my book and writing something and creating, you know, that's where so much of my joy comes. Yeah.
And just circling back to what you were saying earlier about how do we face the little things, right? And the little moments. I think the key word in there, Aubrey, is practice. Yeah. Right? Because I'm imagining all the listeners out there, right? And it's like, that's where it's got to begin, right? Each moment by moment, how am I showing up here? If I can show up for the little things, I can show up for the big things, but it's got to be that practice. You know, we know this about human psychology and how we grow and how we learn. It's got to be that routine. Got to be that routine.
So I invite everybody to just try on either one of these sets of questions, like what is the gift here? Or my series, my escalation of 3, what is my opportunity to learn? What is my opportunity to love this? What is my opportunity to enjoy this? Yeah. No matter what you're going through. Yeah. Just like try that on for a day. Try that on for, you know, half a day. I don't care. Like try it on for whatever comes up, or just save it for when anything is troublesome, or even, you know, anything's good. You know, like what is my opportunity to learn, love, or enjoy this even more? You know, what's holding me back? So I mean, I think applying that and practicing it, that's going to yield better result. And I think another important thing is like, don't worry about yesterday's, like if you try this on and then you do pretty good for a day and then you think like you got it and then you forget it and you don't got it and you're like, oh, like don't like let the burden of yesterday's learning affect today's. Like today is a new day and you may have to relearn and re-practice.
Oh yeah, you know, at a deeper level.
Like the first, like you can start a fire once, you know, from scratch.
Might get lucky.
Yeah. But, and then maybe not be able to start it for the next 3 or 4 times, right? You know, and like, what are you going to do? Think that you're like, you've lost all hope and you're no, you just keep trying to make fires.
Yeah, exactly.
And eventually you get better, you know?
Yeah, it's a practice. Yeah, I tell my students, right, I work with a lot of kids and a lot of adults when it comes to nature connection. And you know, everyone's, we do an exercise called the 5-minute fire. It's a simple one, right? Okay, you get 1 match, 5 minutes. Can you light a fire that lasts for 60 seconds, right? Simple enough. But everyone tends to think, oh, I know how to light a match. I know how to do this. You know, 99 out of 100 will fail that test the first time, right? And the one person who gets it, it's usually luck. Yeah. Right. So I always tell my students, I'm like, who would you rather be with? Because we get so attached to the outcome, right? So everyone's like all bummed when they don't get their fire, right? And I'm like, hey, it's okay, right? Just come back to the basic practice. Let's learn from this. But I tell my students, I'm like, well, who would you rather be stuck out in the woods with? Somebody who got lucky once and knows how to light a fire, you know, but only did it one time, or somebody who failed 999 times, but learn from each of those, right? And then actually figure it out in a meaningful, integrated manner how to light fires. Yeah. Right. And so it's this idea that there's no such thing as a failure if we learn from our mistakes. Right. And that can be applied to anything. That's transferable all the way around.
Everything.
Yeah.
What is you've mentioned the word rite of passage, and I think that's something that's been part of human development culturally in many cultures for tens of thousands of years.
Huge.
But it's markedly absent or kind of vapid, kind of plastic in our current society. You know, I mean, there's still rituals like the bar mitzvah, which is like, okay, you memorize a few things.
What does that mean?
You get some money from your relatives and you dance with somebody. You know, like it's not like it doesn't have the real meaning it is, or the quinceañera, or there's things that are there in different cultures in different ways, and not even every culture. But nothing of substance, you know, not like the Vision Quest I went on when I was, you know, out of high school and I was 18, not like, you know, the sweat lodge ceremonies that I'm sure you're leading in the whole rites of passage.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that topic in general, and like, how can parents orient themselves? Like, what's the need for the rites of passage, and what are the ways that we can start bringing this back?
Yeah. Well, it's a huge question, right? And so I think starting off just by defining it, because in a lot of circles today, it has become a popular term, and people use that terminology in different ways, right? Like somebody goes through a big event in their life and they'll say, oh, I went through a rite of passage. Well, I'm a bit more of a purist in terms of the language, right, and the syntax. So for me, a rite of passage is an initiatory event that transitions a human being from one phase of life to another. Now, when I say phase of life, I'm talking about the big phases of life. So we've got birth, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, maybe parenting, becoming an elder, and then death, right? Like it's less than, what is that, 6 or 7? So a rite of passage is, and it's inherently community-based, and it's inherently based in nature. So it's a ceremony that's recognizing this transition that we go through. Now, I also refer to it as an initiation, but so all rites of passages are initiations, but not all initiations are rites of passage, right? Initiation may be a big event in your life that you learn something significant from. That can happen. Those things happen. But it doesn't mean that you shifted into a new phase of life.
Right. It'd be like saying my car accident was a rite of passage.
Right.
No.
I would say it's an initiation,
it was a test, an initiation, a challenge, and, you know, gift, a blessing, whatever. You can call it a lot of things, but not a rite of passage.
Right.
You know, because I didn't try to smash my face into a guardrail. You know, that wasn't
exactly.
Wasn't, you know, putting my fucking hand in a glove full of bullet ants on purpose.
Right.
You know, it's just like, it's different.
Yeah. Yeah, so classically, rites of passage, because they're so significant and so rare, right? The old cultures, all the earth-based cultures, indigenous cultures, they all understood the need for this. One of the things I've learned more than anything, maybe from indigenous culture, is the importance of honoring the transitions in life. Again, the big and the small. And those rites of passage, I mean, they're the biggest if you think about it. So. Right. So I lead rites of passage. I lead boys on rites of passage when they're entering into adolescence, right? And that shift into puberty and that new life stage that's coming in. I also lead men in rites of passage, right? Taking young men and transitioning them into manhood. And what's called for there is a new sense of self, right? That's what it comes down to, is if a person's going to actually successfully grow up, right? Because, I mean, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say, right, our world is full of 30, 40-year-olds who are still teenagers, right, developmentally. And so if a person's going to grow up, they've got to come up against something significant and tangible. So the key element in a rite of passage, that, as I see it, is that there's a challenge big enough, right, formidable enough, that they've got to face something that they've never faced before, literally like a challenge of a scope that is greater than anything they've faced before, that a part of them feels like, shit, I don't know if I can do this. Like I might not make it. Part of them is saying that. On the other hand, part of them thinks, well, maybe it's possible. And so what happens, right? They've got to dig. They've got to dig deep within and draw from their core, right? And to face this unknown challenge of this huge scope. And in doing so, they're proving not so much to, you know, mom or dad or community. I mean, they are, but mostly they're proving to themselves that, shit, I've got what it takes. And if I can do this, man, I can do anything.
Yeah, it's a way to look at themselves differently.
Yeah.
Look at themselves as the person who went through this thing. And so they know something about themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you don't know yourself until you test yourself. I think it was Jordan Peterson who said that. But
yeah,
like, this is the way that you get to say, like, okay, I feel change is happening. I feel this preparation and readiness, you know, to ascend to this next level, to transform in a certain way, but I don't know if I'm there yet. I don't know.
Right.
Am I a man now, or am I still a boy, or what's going on? Like, am I, you know, a provider, or like what's happening? And then it's just kind of a point where you test yourself and you get to go, oh yeah, you know, I am that thing. You know, am I a scared kid, or am I now a young man with courage? You know, like, I don't know. You think you might know,
right?
But you don't really know until you like put it to the test in some kind of meaningful way.
Yeah. And so as a guide of that work, you know, it's a process of mentoring, right? Like someone I'm working with, I'm going through a process of weeks, probably months, oftentimes even years before going into that, right? Like these days, that's a pretty sexy term, right? And you say Rite of Passage and it gets a lot of attention. And there's whole organizations centered on facilitating rites of passage just as single one-time events, kind of like going through the McDonald's drive-through, right? And that's a pet peeve for me, because for me, I've always seen a rite of passage as just a node on a bigger journey, right? Like, so the boys that I take through when they're 13, I might have been mentoring them for 6 years. You know, the young men who are now 22, maybe I've mentored them for 5, maybe 10 years. Right. And even when I work with people one-on-one, if there's going to be an element like that, I'm putting months of time in ahead on the front end so that I know who this person is. I know their strengths. I know their weaknesses. I'm showing up for them. I'm seeing how they show up for themselves and how they don't, and can really dial that challenge appropriately. Because, right, if this is like flow state, right, theory. If you give a person a challenge that's not enough, that they have too much skill for, what do you get? You get boredom.
Yeah.
If you give a person a challenge that's too much, that they don't, truly too much, like way beyond their edge, you're going to get overwhelmed and a breakdown. And neither of those is useful. Learning doesn't happen in either. So if you imagine that XY graph, where with skill on the horizontal and challenge on the vertical, there's a sweet spot in there of flow learning, which is where the challenge meets the skill. And for Rite of Passage, it's very subtle, because you have to ride just beyond that flow state, right? Just beyond that sweet spot. Not much, but you got to ride just on the edge of that. Yeah. And that's where that real transformation happens.
Almost like it's drawing. It's, you know, you have to be a little bit ahead of where it's comfortable, because it's drawing you into a state where that will be comfortable.
Exactly.
Right? You know, and it's just pulling you, but not putting it so far that you get discouraged and retract further and actually, you know, think that you'll never make it. And so it's just enough to have that tension, that kind of magnetic pull on the iron of your soul, that magnetic pull to pull you into a little bit of a higher state. Yeah. You know, and that's powerful work. So what are your techniques? You have sweats as one of your techniques.
That's part of it. The big one I use is and you mentioned it, is the vision quest. You know, for me, Aubrey, that's that's my favorite.
Yeah.
Put it that way. You know, I've done, I don't know, maybe 10 quests in my adult life. My first when I was 23, 24, something like that. And I've facilitated, you know, dozens, I don't know, maybe 100. And the power of the quest, you know, the quest is ancient, right? I mean, we can go back to all of the great, so many, maybe not all, but many of the great spiritual teachers. I mean, Jesus had his time in the desert, right? Muhammad in the cave, Moses.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus was 40 days in the desert.
That was hardcore.
I went 14 days in Patagonia and I couldn't even handle it. And it was Patagonia. It was beautiful. It wasn't a desert. And it was 14. And I was like, damn, I can't handle this. I gotta get home. I need hugs. I need hugs. I need hugs, everybody.
Is that what you were doing down there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right on. So, it works, right? I mean, traditionally it would have been 4 days, but you can do a quest, and I've done them in as little as 24 hours. But it's about again, we've got to get out of this instant kind of consumeristic mindset, right? If it's not just about the event, it's about everything leading up to it. So traditionally, the quest and any rite of passage is going to have 3 phases, right? There's preparation, traditionally known as severance. There's the threshold event itself, the ordeal, and then there's reintegration, incorporation. So the severance, the preparation is about leaving behind who we've been, leaving behind this image, this story, these beliefs, right, of who I know myself to be, who I think Tim is, right? There's got to be a shedding of that and entering into the mystery.
And by the way, leaving behind sounds really friendly. Sounds like you could, I'll just drop this off. Like, I'll just take this suitcase off.
It's got to die, Aubrey. It's got to die.
No, it fucking hurts.
Yeah.
Like, really leaving this stuff behind, it's like a death of a part of you, something that you're holding on. It's like pulling pieces that are like Velcroed to the nerves in
cemented.
Cemented into the nerves inside you. And each time you peel, I mean, it's really hard. And that's, I mean, I think that's probably the resistance that people have to these things like Vision Quest, because the shedding of the old, you know, when you haven't shed frequently enough and long, you know, as much as you needed to, or maybe it's just the right time. It's really
a big deal.
It's really a big deal. And it's really can be intensely challenging.
Right. But compare that pain, okay? Let's just be straight up about this. Compare the pain of that death to the pain of living a life that's not your own, right? I mean, I've lived that.
Incomparable.
Right. I've had those times where I'm like, I'm going through the motions, even things that have served as my purpose in the past. And it's like, this is not doing it for me. Now, I'm the kind of guy, I can't live with myself when that's happening. I cannot. I've always been that way. And so if I'm not on track with my calling, forget it. You know, I honestly don't know how people, how others can live that way.
They ignore it. So what do people do? I mean, there's
they check out. Right? They numb
different, out. Numb out or perpetual action as distraction. You know, like you see that person who's like, everybody looks at like somebody who's obsessed with just scrolling through Instagram and like staying busy and doing stuff. And they're like, oh, they got ADD, you know, they got blah, blah, blah. They'll try to diagnose and try to blame the phone and shit like that. No, I don't think so. I mean, maybe there's some of that shit going around, whatever. I'm not a doctor, but I really believe that they're just running from the truth of who they are and what they need to do and what the opportunity is. Maybe not need, what the opportunity is for them to give their gift to the world, what their opportunity is to be in gladness and fill the bellies, to offer their medicine. And they're running from that by this constant distraction or depression, which is this kind of place of hopelessness where you can just say, it's all not possible. I'm so small. I can't do anything. The world is against me. I'm just going to sit in this place of hopelessness. Or there's the other path of trying to prove something in some other way to compensate for what you really know you should be doing. Well, I'm super jacked in the gym, so I got my, love stuff figured out too, or like I'm super rich, so I'm not vulnerable. And so there's so many ways, so many mechanisms that all of us are doing, which is really running from the primary truth of who we are and what we're called to do in the greatest level.
And that's the key word, what you just said, which is the vulnerability, right? And I mean, I'm 44, right? So I've been around at least long enough to know that if I'm going to really successfully do this thing called life, if I'm going to step into my greatest calling, I've got to have a relationship with my vulnerability. Right? I've got to, and not for you. I mean, because yes, vulnerability will lead to connection. It'll lead to bonding, and that's beautiful. But first and foremost for myself, right? In those moments when I'm up against my edge, right? To just be able to slow down and recognize, shit, I've got a part of myself that's feeling really scared right now. And just like full stop. Okay. It's okay. I'm a human being.
Yep.
It's okay.
That's huge.
And that's the hardest thing for people. It's the hardest thing for me. I mean, it's the hardest thing for all of us. I don't think it gets easier. I mean, it kind of does, but it kind of doesn't. We can pattern ourselves, right, as we practice the art of becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable, it kind of does get easier.
Well, maybe the primary pain, the primary discomfort doesn't necessarily get easier, but the shame around admission of it, oh, that gets way easier.
Big time. Yeah.
Because then you start to realize there's nothing to be ashamed of.
Exactly.
And then you get curious. And instead of this like, oh my God, what is this? You get curious and you're like, oh, well, what is this?
Yeah.
You know, it's this. And you practice that, and then you just start telling people, and you know that the result of your vulnerability when you express it is almost 100% appreciation.
Yeah.
You know, like maybe there'll be that random, hater who's too in their own protection and aversion and projection that your vulnerability will trigger them because they're seeing the same thing in them, but they don't want to admit it.
Yeah.
Whatever. Okay, there's a couple of those people, but overwhelmingly, when you share your truth, you find that the world responds in a positive way and you feel better. And so you get used to this idea of like, okay, cool. I have something vulnerable to share because you know that it's going to be medicine for you and it's going to be medicine for everybody else. Doesn't mean that the thing that you feel is any easier. That's what you're saying. Like the thing you feel is still always going to be hard. Yeah. But the shame around it, even in
it does lift.
It lifts. And even in communication and relationship, like if you're the one who wants to be right, and if you're the one who wants to protect and not share what you're feeling, I've been that person. I've been the one like, no, I'm not jealous. No, I'm good. No, I'm not jealous. And then what that ends up happening is it creates distance because there's the sense that you're not being authentic, and the person you're communicating with also can sense that you're not being authentic. Of course, yeah. And then it just builds more distance, and then the jealousy increases, and then eventually there's a big explosion, which even then you may not even acknowledge it. You may blame it away and not even acknowledge it until finally you get down to the root and just say, all right, here it is. This is me. Yeah. I feel like I'm the size of someone who could fit in the Monopoly thimble. Like that's how big I am right now. And somebody else is rolling the dice, and I just got the luxury tax, and
exactly
everything's fucked, and so it's interesting, but you can definitely practice that removal of shame and just be like, oh yeah, I'm feeling this. Okay. Yeah. I know I was cool like a month ago and everything was good, but right now I'm not. Today's this day, and I'm feeling this shit again.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't know. This is just me. You get used to that.
Yeah. And what helps is to be in a community where that's being practiced. And that's one of the things that brings me a lot of hope about our world today is more and more, it is becoming more commonplace, right? So you might find a mentor, you might just find some brothers or sisters who are practicing that regularly, and it's beginning to normalize it, right? And as we do that, we normalize it inside ourselves. And we learn to show up for ourselves. And I think that's the biggest thing. And again, it's a practice, right? And so, yes, the shame does lift. In that way, it gets easier. But the initial pain, it still stings.
That's still there.
That's if you can tell me somebody, and I would be interested, or anybody, right, who has found a way to avoid that, you'll become a millionaire, I think.
Or you don't care if you're a millionaire, so you don't.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the person who I saw who was closest to that was my one of my mentors, and through his books and also in person, was Don Miguel Ruiz.
Oh yeah.
And watching him approach the day, he was somehow able to get to the point where every hug was like he was hugging his long lost friend that he's known forever and hadn't seen in a year. Every sunset was like the most beautiful, perfect sunset that he would just look at it with a smile. It wasn't a show. The content was done for the day, and he would just be out there with his glass of red wine. Yep. He'd have one of those every night, and he'd look at the sunset, and he would just smile with this like childlike awe and enjoyment of the sunset. And it was just repeatable. Yeah. There wasn't this hedonic tolerance of, okay, yeah, I'm hugging someone. It's another student, and there's 12 other students I got to hug. Like everyone was like, wow,
full presence.
I get to hug you. Whoa, this sunset, I've seen 5,000 of these, but this one, whoa, and that presence, it gave me hope, because it gave me hope that, not only are there incremental improvements that are possible, but it gave me hope that there's a resting state of being that could potentially be achievable. Yeah. because I do feel myself more happy. I do feel myself able to be more present, able to be in my emotional body, whether that's bliss or whether that's tears of joy. I mean, I cry lots of tears of joy, way more than I ever have in my life before. But I also retract back into old patterns of, distraction and pity and worry and fear and all of these things. But then I can remember Don Miguel and say, okay, well, maybe I'll roll that Yahtzee and I'll get that state that sticks.
Yeah.
But even if I don't, it doesn't matter. It's not about the end point. It's about, I know I am making gradual improvements, and the journey is enjoyable. And it's enjoyable making progress on this path to being more in love with life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had an elder and a teacher who passed away in 2007, Gilbert Walking Bull. He was a traditional Oglala Lakota holy man, right? Full blood. And he grew up, he was born in like 1930. And a phenomenal story, this guy, right? So he was raised by 23 holy people, spiritual leaders, in the 30s at a time when those people, the Lakota people, were under attack, right? The reservation system had been established. Most people were on reservations. And so the spiritual leaders came together, many of them, 23 came together and recognized that their spiritual way of life was under attack and that it may be lost forever. And so what they did was they banded together off reservation in a little area near Wombly, South Dakota, and they gathered up 15 kids, young kids, that they had been mentoring, of course, and watching closely, and they saw had great potential as spiritual leaders and healers themselves. And so then they proceeded to raise these kids, for the next 20 years. And Gilbert was one of those kids, right? And he would, in the years I spent with him, the last 7 or 8 years of his life, he would joke around. Very, very poor people, right? And he said, the few toys we had were wheelchairs. I'm like, wheelchairs? He's like, wheelchairs. Like, why did you have wheelchairs? He said, because people would show up to my grandmothers and grandfathers in wheelchairs and leave walking, right? Like, holy shit. Now, if you track back the lineage, he's he was the blood descendant of a holy man named Woptuka, and Woptuka was the healer who gave Crazy Horse the charm that Crazy Horse wore behind his ear that made him impervious in battle. Right, so he has this amazing lineage, right, and he goes back as well to Sitting Bull and some of the other great leaders. And to sit with Gilbert was like literally sitting with an ancestor, and I just cherish those times. I mean, there was, I don't know, a handful of us, my current wife and some close friends, at the time we'd go out there and study with him, and he'd bring us into the sweat, and he would work with the sacred pipe. And he had, he had that presence that you're talking about of Don Miguel Ruiz, right? He was like magically fully present in each moment. And it would just blow my mind to see, the stuff he was capable of and how big his heart was, right? I mean, you imagine a people, right, who were nearly decimated, right? His ancestors were nearly decimated by mine, right? And here's this love coming from his heart, this willingness to share. Like, I'm not in that role, right? But when we think about ancestral grief and ancestral trauma, it's like, wow, like what perspective would I take, if I were in that place?
All of that is just a form of resistance that ultimately can yield the result of one who's able to love even more deeply, right. And then again, that's the thing. Everybody focus on the trauma, and you call it trauma and not call it an opportunity, to be a gift or be a blessing, in what way? Immense pressure, immense suffering, immense, like unfathomable.
Right. Multi-generational,
unfathomable.
Yeah.
But with all of that comes an opportunity.
Yes,
an opportunity to use that as the thing that catalyzes you even farther, that kind of slingshot effect. And it sounds like, your mentor there was able to to do that in a way, to receive all of that pressure and not let it turn into the bile of bitterness, but turn into the fuel and the energy to become love.
Yeah.
And it's great to have those examples, have these people that we know, like, oh, that person,
right.
That person gives me hope for where I might be heading, and not to put the expectation on being there is the only way to succeed, but knowing that some things are possible. And that's a great gift that we can give to people when we show them what is possible. Right. Like, hey, it's possible to love this much. It's possible to be this present. It's possible to be this vulnerable. It's possible to be, this on purpose, this in touch with your soul. It's possible. Right. And then other people are like, yeah, it's fucking possible for me too.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the biggest gifts we can give anybody is, being.
Yeah.
And that's also one of the things that, the world can't take away from us. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess it could kill us, but, and we'll get probably a chance in another life to do it anyways. Right. But, there's lots of things with our career, lots of things with what we provide, what we write, whatever we think our gift might be, and we'll think of it in a tangible form. Mm-hmm. Like, oh yeah, I got 4 more books. Like, that's my thing. But what if I can't write the books? Or what if something happens to my ability to reach my audience? Or, well, the one thing that no matter what I can do is I can go on my path of being who I am, what I am, of knowing how I serve. And nobody can take that away. Right. Even if these other terrible things happen and the world turns on me and comes after me, I can still use that to be a different way. And maybe only a couple people will see that, but that's okay. Because
you see it.
Because I see it, and somebody will probably see it too. Yeah. And even if they don't, it just opens up that possibility. By myself doing it, it opens up that possibility. And that takes a lot of the pressure off of like, well, what if this book doesn't sell, and what if this thing doesn't? So what? It doesn't matter. Yeah. Like, all of these things are just descriptions of my journey to being. Yeah. And the primary thing for me to worry about is just my journey to being. Mm. And I'm really coaching myself here. So like, this is me giving myself a fucking pep talk.
That's how it goes.
Because that's where I get tripped up, because you get worried about, I want to be of service. I want to make a big impact. And then you start worrying about the impact, and you realize how many fucking things can disrupt your ability to give an impact.
Crazy.
Right? But okay, but what's the thing that's of the most impact? Well, it's being someone that's gone from someone who's slightly anxious and neurotic and depressed and have all the tendencies that I have, rampantly seeking validation and needing all of to someone who is a little bit more like Don Miguel, like through that process. And that's enough. Yeah. That's enough. And that's within my control, no matter what happens.
Yeah. And that's that ultimate security, right? That we're all yearning for. There was I think maybe it was in the book Black Elk Speaks, the indigenous people, when the Europeans first came over to the North America, they saw the patterns of how they were being, right, in this kind of endless consumption mindset. And they spoke about the emptiness inside the heart and the soul that was trying to be filled with all of these things, right? And that, of course, is impossible to do, right? You're never going to fill that void with the external validation or money or power or fame or food or drugs or whatever. It's got to be met from within, and that cultivating that trust, cultivating our own relationship with the deepest sense of who we are and our deepest place in the world. That's where that satisfaction comes from, And it doesn't mean that, we don't have problems, right? Because a lot of people, hear about my work, they're like, oh, discover your purpose. It's like the holy grail, right? Once I know my purpose, it's easy street from here. Like, well, no, you're still going to have yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're still going to have basic fear, basic resistance, but you can have a different relationship with it, right? You can have a different relationship with yourself. And that's what I yearn for, for others, for you, for me, for all of us, for our world, is a world where we know ourselves in that way, and that we've addressed that void from the very core, right? Yeah.
That's awesome, man. I think I'm grateful for the work that you're putting out there, and I'm
right on.
Grateful for you coming out here to do this podcast.
Yeah.
Based in Idaho.
Uh-huh.
But do you travel around at all? Do you do any other?
A little bit, not too much. I work with people remotely.
Yeah.
So if people are interested, we've got our wilderness school that people can come out to. That's Twin Eagles Wilderness School on the web, twineagles.org. And if people want to do some one-on-one work, that's my newer work at Purpose Mountain, and that's www.purposemountain.com. And so I work with people, Skype and phone and that kind of thing. And I lead Vision Quest, so people can come out and do a full experience, in Idaho, or I can lead people remotely, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Beautiful, man.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure hanging with you.
Awesome.
I'd love to get out in the wild with you someday.
It'd be great, man.
Yeah. Maybe we'll co-create some experience.
I would love it. That'd be sweet.
Bring some people out and learn some things.
Yeah. Appreciate being here, Aubrey.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks, everybody. Peace.